Hello and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Millicent Walker. First, the headlines. Swedish Prime Minister Magdalena Andersson is due to go to Parliament to secure support for an application to join NATO today. Ukraine says it is preparing for Russian push in Donbass region just as Russian army attacks Ukrainian targets. Plus, it's a large-scale NATO military exercise due later today. We begin this morning with news that the Ukrainian troops defending the city of Kharkiv have reached the state border with Russia. The regional governor, Oleh Senugobov, made these claims on the Telegram messaging service. However, it is not yet clear how many troops had reached the Russian border and where. The Ukrainian Defense Ministry has published a video purportedly showing a number of soldiers from a territorial defense brigade at an unspecified location on the frontier. The footage showed men in military uniform gathered near a blue and yellow boundary marker and making various celebratory hand gestures as a man said they have reached the border. Ukraine has been driving Russian forces away from Kharkiv, the second largest Ukrainian city. President Volodymyr Zelensky says Ukraine is preparing for a new Russian push in the eastern Donbass region since failing to take Kyiv at the beginning of the invasion late February. The control of Donbass has become one of Moscow's main objectives. In his nightly address, President Zelensky said, quote, "We are preparing for new attempts by Russia to attack in Donbass to somehow intensify its movement in the south of Ukraine. The occupiers still do not want to admit that they are in a dead end and their so-called special operation has already gone bankrupt." He once again called on the West to impose an oil embargo on Russia. Staying with President Zelensky, he said talks with Russia on evacuating the remaining in Azovstal plants in Mariupol were still ongoing. Russian forces have been constantly bombarding the steelworks in the southern port of Mariupol, the last bastion of hundreds of Ukrainian defenders in a city almost completely controlled by Russia after more than 2 months of a siege. Many of those still in the steel plant are members of the Azov regiment, which started as a battalion of mostly far-right volunteers after Russian-backed separatists seized parts of the eastern Donbass region in 2014.
We are continuing very difficult and delicate negotiations in order to save our people from Mariupol, from Azovstal. We do this every day, and the main thing is that the agreements were fulfilled. Today's Russian missile strikes were on the Lviv region. The shelling of Mariupol, Lysychansk towns and communities in the Donetsk region, all the occupiers' brutality that Ukraine experiences daily will only lead to the fact that the Russian soldiers who survive will take this evil with them to Russia.
And Ukraine's army says the Russian military has continued artillery and air strikes on Mariupol, particularly the plant there. The General Staff of Ukraine's armed forces said in the latest update that the main efforts of the occupiers focus on blocking and impacting the unit in the area of the Azovstal plant. Over the past day, the General Staff said Ukraine's army repelled 17 attacks on Donetsk and Luhansk. It also destroyed 3 Russian tanks, 1 artillery system, and 6 units of armored equipment. It added that the losses of Russian personnel were also being clarified. And 2 people have died and 1 wounded in Luhansk due to shelling. That's a statement by the region's governor. Serhiy Hadai wrote on his Telegram channel this morning that a man and a woman died on the spot. The Russians fired on a house in the old districts of the city at about 1600 local time, and another man was also hospitalized. Staying with Ukraine's armed forces, they've released a video saying that showed servicemen firing new US M777 howitzers at the front line in the east of the country. The US Embassy in Kyiv said that Washington has delivered all but one of the 90 artillery pieces that were due to send. The M777 howitzer consignment is part of a huge outlay of weapons from Washington to help Ukraine fend off Russia's invasion, which began February 24. The U.S. Embassy reposted another Ukrainian military video of Kyiv soldiers training to use the weapons.
Протри на всякий случай.
Some of the biggest ever drills in the history of the Baltics by the military alliance are due to begin later today. They are codenamed Hedgehog. The exercises will take place in Estonia over the next 2 weeks and involve 15,000 troops from 10 countries, including the UK, the US, and current non-members Finland and Sweden. Despite being planned well before Russia launched its invasion of Ukraine, the drills are now taking place at a moment of significantly raised tension between NATO and Moscow. In the context of the Russian invasion, the exercises are highly symbolic for the Baltic states, as they are intended to test their capacity to respond to a similar incursion by enemy forces. Well, earlier, Sweden announced plans to join NATO, but not to have bases in the country. The decision approved by the ruling Social Democratic Party is for Sweden's security, so says its Prime Minister. Today, the Swedish Prime Minister, Magdalena Andersson, is due to go to Parliament to secure support for an application and will also chair a special cabinet meeting on the issue. Meanwhile, Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov has said that Finland and Sweden choosing to join NATO would have far-reaching consequences, adding that the global situation is changing radically as a result of the move.
Sweden's Prime Minister Magdalena Andersson gave her press briefing shortly after the Parliament gave the nod for the country to proceed with its application to join NATO.
The Social Democratic Party has concluded that Sweden should join NATO. Our 200-year-long standing policy of military non-alignment has served Sweden well. But the issue at hand is whether military non-alignment will keep serving as well. And Russia's unprovoked invasion of Ukraine is not only illegal and indefensible, it also undermines the European security order that Sweden builds its security on.
She said a position in favor of NATO means that they are prepared to abandon a security policy that Sweden has had in different forms over 200 years. The Prime Minister says she would go to Parliament on Monday to seek broad support for an application to join. Turkey's foreign minister said on Sunday that Sweden and Finland must stop supporting terrorist groups in their countries, provide clear security guarantees, and lift export bans on Turkey as they seek NATO membership.
Welcome to this press conference after the NATO...
Meanwhile, NATO and the United States say they are confident that Turkish concerns could not hold up bids by Finland and Sweden to join the Western military alliance.
Turkey is an important ally. Turkey has expressed some concerns, and as we always do in NATO, when there are concerns, when there are questions, we sit down, and I'm confident that we will be able to find a common ground, an agreement, consensus on how to move on the membership issue.
NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg also said the process for Finland and Sweden to join NATO could be very quick. He hopes that Ukraine could win the war as Russian military advances appear to be faltering.
U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken said he had spoken to his Turkish counterpart on Ankara's concerns regarding Sweden and Finland's entry into NATO, and that after a previous meeting of foreign ministers, he was confident a consensus could be reached. Mr. Blinken's comments come as Finnish President Sauli Niinistö said yesterday that his latest talk with Russian President about his country's bid to join NATO was measured and did not contain any threats.
Consequences of Russia's war for NATO's defense posture, but also NATO's new strategic concept, providing NATO with political framework for the years to come. This informal meeting builds a bridge to the summit in June, where we will meet next. And dear Minister of Spain, dear Joseph, I'm very much looking forward to all again, and especially Tony Blinken.
And hundreds of people gathered near airbase in the southern Turkish province of Adana on Sunday to voice their opposition to the military presence of the US-led North Atlantic Treaty Organization. About hundreds of meters away from the base, protesters were chanting slogans, holding banners reading, "Get out, NATO, this land is ours." Some protesters believe that NATO being a military alliance has led to massive numbers of bloodshed in the neighboring areas. Since Turkey joined the military alliance in 1952, voices calling for its withdrawal and shutdown of the military bases have never ceased in the country. The United States, which now uses the air base in Sirlik, along with Turkey, claims the troops were stationed to protect the south wing of NATO. However, reports have revealed that in the airbase stores tactical nuclear weapons, and protesters were worried that consequences caused by such weapons would eventually befall the Turkish people.
We are here to protest the NATO fortress in Incirlik. We're saying that it is the source of every manipulation, every vicious attack that has been done to the Turkish people and the surrounding countries. And they do not belong to it. Their manipulative interruptions are not welcome, and they are seen. We will not stop until they are banished from our lands.
Well, joining us to talk more about the situation in Ukraine is a security expert who joins us from Kent, Mr. Temitope Olodo. Always a pleasure having you join us on the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
Let's begin with Sweden, the governing party dropping its long opposition to, the country joining NATO. Were you surprised?
Not at all. With the ongoing drama between Ukraine and Russia, anyone, particularly in that region, will more or less will have draw up the conclusion that it's just a matter of time for Sweden and Finland to actually try and seek the support of NATO. With the population changing their mindset, we now have about 75% of the people in those countries literally saying, we think joining NATO is a good idea. That was not the case, before the Ukraine and Russia crisis. And I think that is the reason why we're seeing a change in policy from the government, or two governments who were initially, believed in non-alliance, neutrality, and now actually looking at, joining forces with NATO.
Interesting that you should say that, because in terms of the polls, I think for Sweden it's about half of the population, while for Finland 75% in support. But then the former Prime Minister to Sweden said that Sweden stopped being neutral when it joined the European Union in 1995. But then it's also a different thing for Finland, which is strongly moving ahead with that intention. But Putin has called it a mistake. Even though the Finnish president said that the call he had with Putin over the weekend did not contain any threats. But what do you think could be going through President Putin's mind?
I think considering that they share a 1,300-kilometer border with Russia, that more or less is where the red line starts. This was a miscalculation by, of course, Putin, because he wasn't expecting that this will snowball into this situation where you have two countries who were neutral before. Of course, they were sharing intelligence and exercises with NATO, but never would have thought, not in our lifetime, that it will have gotten to this situation. But here we are now where these two countries are now contemplating, but not only contemplating, are rushing to pick up their ticket, like the Nigerian politicians are picking up their nomination ticket, to join the race to become part of NATO, which initially started with just 12 members, back in the early 40s. So I think we're seeing a serious issue here. And the way things are going, even many of us analysts are sitting close to our TV set and listening to different news to find out exactly how this game would play out, because only God could tell what is going to happen next.
And we're seeing, several protests in Turkey, and Turkey, seeming to would definitely have a key role to play, the deciding factor in their applications to NATO. Yeah. But what do you think are some of its reservations? And is it seeking leverage, even though it is said that that is not the case?
I think NATO has made it clear that they would take into consideration any serious concerns that Turkey has, and Turkey is talking from the fact that there is this issue about alliance support for support that they might have for a terrorist group, that and that is where they are coming from. Of course, both parties Finland will of course disagree with that, to say no, that is not the case. I think there will be an amicable way of resolving this issue. But let's not kid ourselves. This war that started over 80 days ago was not just Ukraine fighting Russia. It was the West fighting Russia, because it's the West weaponry that is slowing down Russians' advancement within the territory of Ukraine. But not only slowing it down, but they are losing a lot of, in fact, they said that over 30% of the troops that have been committed, or weaponry that have been committed to this war, have been lost. So it's a huge loss, to Russia, and Russia needs to save face. How would they save face? Would they go nuclear? Would they intensify? What would they do? Most of us are just guessing what they will do, but we know the war is being fought both in the south, both in the east, and there's a lot of destruction that is going on as we speak.
It's also interesting that you should say that, meaning that you agree with what Putin said during his Victory Day speech, saying, this is sort of, between the West and against Russia. And we also heard recently from the EU ambassador, Russia's ambassador to the EU, who said that, the West was really pumping all sorts of weapons. When he was asked the question, when will this war end? So it's almost as if he wants the West to stop pumping weapons to Ukraine, yet it wants to take control of Donbass and, and several other lists that it has, put out there. But do you think that, and this is with NATO, do you think that NATO has is helping as much Ukraine as it should, is given that kind of reassurance even to the other 27 EU countries in this kind of situation?
It's quite interesting that you're saying this. I think one of the things that have stopped NATO's full intervention in this situation is because Ukraine is not a member of NATO. We all know that. But they've given enough support in terms of giving weapons to them and saying, go ahead, go and do the fight yourself. But many that are members of NATO now will be asking themselves, how will NATO really defend us if this issue really comes down to the fact that Russia invades or attacks a NATO alliance country? Because we're talking of 30 strong members of NATO, and Finland and Sweden joining them now will make them 32. They will love that. But the question is, how much defense could they give? Both groups, both Russia and NATO, are using Ukraine as a playing field where they are actually seeing how testing each other's capability and each other's skill set, to be able to confront each other. And I think Britain, for example, you could say it actually playing out. Now, both Sweden and Finland are not getting advice and support, because what happened initially when Ukraine was asking for support, the NATO countries were a bit slow, but you could see UK now signing contracts, with Sweden and the others to say we're going to enter. So they are preempting and putting in place measures in case Russia decides to go rogue and attack those two countries. So we're seeing a lot of changes in the way the game or the war chess game is being played. So everything is changing, and this is because of what is happening currently in Ukraine.
We'll continue to watch the developments from there. We always appreciate your time. Thank you so much, Mr. Temitope, for joining us on the program.
Thank you for having me.
You're watching our coverage of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Coming up, global wheat prices jump after India's export ban. Please stay with us for more. Welcome back. According to residents of a small village north of Kyiv, the intentional flooding of the area that created a quagmire and submerged cellars and fields, but prevented a Russian attack on the capital, was worth all the sacrifice. Ukrainian forces opened a dam early in the war in Demidov, causing the Irpin River to flood the village and thousands of acres around. The move has been seen, or rather has been credited with stopping Russian soldiers and tanks from breaking through Ukraine's lines. More than a third of some fields have been flooded. Some 2 months later, people in the village were still dealing with the aftermath of the flooding, using inflatable boats to move around, planting whatever dry swaths of land were left with flowers and vegetables. Children were left with wetlands to use as playgrounds. The Russian invasion, now in its third month, has claimed thousands of civilian lives, sending millions of Ukrainians fleeing and reducing cities to rubble. Moscow calls its actions a special military operation to disarm Ukraine and protect it from fascists. Ukraine and the West say the allegation is baseless. The United States and the European Union plan to announce on today a joint effort aimed at identifying semiconductor supply disruptions as well as countering Russian disinformation. Top U.S. officials are visiting the French scientific hub of Saclay for a meetup of the Trade and Technology Council created last year as China increasingly exerts its technology clout. U.S. officials acknowledged that Russia's invasion of Ukraine has broadened the Council's scope, but said the Western bloc so has its eye on competition from China. The two sides will announce an early warning system for semiconductor supply disruptions, hoping to avoid excessive competition between Western powers for the vital tech component. The industry has suffered from a shortage of components for chip making, blamed on a boom in global demand for electronic products and pandemic-snarled supply chains. According to the European Commissioner for Competition, we hope to agree on high levels of subsidies, that they will not be more than what is necessary and proportionate and also appropriate. The Russian army has attacked Ukrainian command posts and ammunition depots, as well as a large number of troops and military equipment assembly points in recent days. This according to the country's defense minister. The defense ministry said Russian forces had also shot down Ukrainian military drones in Kharkiv, Donetsk and Luhansk. Ukrainian forces, meanwhile, have launched a counter-offensive against Russian troops holding the city of Izum in the Kharkiv region. And of course, this is a war that has affected a number of people and still affecting the rest of the world. But joining us to talk more about this situation, Dr. Joshua Orabi is executive member, NIDO Russia. He joins us from Moscow. Thank you, Doctor, for joining us on the program.
Thank you very much for having me. Good morning.
Good morning. I want to begin from the latest on Nigerians in diaspora organization and displaced students. Have they settled in, and is NIDO still in touch with them?
Very well. We know from the last situations and matters that unfolded from 2 months ago right now, the period of 2 months, that many students arrived in the European environment. And then we know that the Nigerian government actually was helpful and eventful, was there to assist, to evacuate a lot of students. We know also that many students stayed back in the European Union. Most of them have found their ways even from the borders of Ukraine to other parts of Europe. And a lot of them have settled down. Till now, we know that some of them may still be in detentions, but then the Nigerians in diaspora organization, especially those who are at the front line, which are Poland, Slovakia, and a couple of them, together with the missions, the Nigerian diplomatic missions have been able to rescue most of those who were detained. And a lot of people are trying to find their feet right now, cut across Europe. Till now, from the last interview I had with the information about Russia being ready to absorb foreign students back into its educational system, we still have till today messages coming asking on how this could be done. So this to show that even some of the displaced students would still not mind to continue with education, even in the Russian Federation. So till today, this is that's the reports reaching us from all across Europe. But then so far, it's been positive. It's been positive.
That's great to hear. Another thing also is really the mental state, the event of February 24, trying to get out of the country. This is definitely something that they might still be struggling with. How is NIDO helping?
Well, NIDO has been helping with coordination of seminars, of programs. Firstly, safe landing. Most of them were really welcome, really welcome, very well. Unfortunately, we don't have as much in Russian Federation, but mostly in the European, in the European auspices, and we keep in touch with them from under the umbrella of Nigerians in Diaspora Organization. But then Europe is being, NIDO Europe is been doing a great job assisting also the diplomatic missions. Of course, you know, we complement each other. Many of them is being helped to get jobs. Many is being placed at places, at societies where they can find some sort of support. Some families have opened their doors to some of them to stay in. You know, the Nigerian naturally is a very strong person. He has gone through several things and can still go through a lot of things. We were brought up this way. And yes, a lot of them are still in shock, but most of them have been able to get off the situation and are ready to come back to their faith. Like I said, a lot of them have had to return, are ready to return to study. And even in Russia, which shows signs of coming back to themselves.
It's really interesting. You do mention Russia. Many people wonder how Russia and its citizens are coping with what, you know, is a sort of alienation of the West, or some would call it a global pariah. Well, what would you say the feeling is on ground there, considering all that is happening with its invasion of Ukraine and what it calls a special military operation?
Just yesterday, on Saturday, rather, I had the opportunity to be hosted by one of our fathers in the academia in the university. He's a lecturer, a senior, and he originally is from Ukraine, originally. But when the break of the Soviet Union happened, he was a student in my own university right now, and he happened to stay back in Russia and remained a Russian citizen. And his story to me was this: Joshua, I am an original Ukrainian, but then what is happening to my country at the moment is just an unfortunate situation. I hope that the Russian army can eventually save the Ukrainian soil from whatever is going on. And believe me, these were his words. Believe me, You will be alive to see this. We may not be alive to see it. But after all of this, in every Ukrainian city, there will be a monument in the name of the President Putin everywhere. Whatever is happening right now, these are just unfortunate decisions taken by the current situation, the current leadership of that nation, who actually do not care or does not care about what we have had, what our fathers had fought for, what history is, and what history is supposed to be. We are one and same people, and nothing can stop that. In fact, it went as far as saying most of the people pushing this fight at the moment are not even real Ukrainians. I am Ukrainian to the blood, and I am Russian. I am a Russian person, because the Ukrainians also have their Russianness in them. And so this is a very unfortunate situation. It affects the Russian people. At the last interview, I said that the Ukrainians and the Russians are same and one people. There is no difference between them. Whatsoever had happened in history today is a part of modern history that always tilts towards civilization, tilts towards living a simple life and forgetting your origin, your actual self. And when you do not, this is my usual quote, if you do not know where you're coming from, then there is no fact, no major fact to tell that you will get to wherever you are supposed to go to. You may eventually be living someone else's life. And this is the situation with the Russian people.
But Dr. Rabi, Russia went into Ukraine. Ukraine didn't go into Russia. Russia went into his brother's land, their homes, displaced them. Thousands are killed. Many thousands are displaced. So, so it's a bit it's a bit baffling to sort of think about that, if their brothers and their cousins, that this is happening to them.
Yes.
I want to ask about Moscow and Russia and the things there. We know that the West has put out unprecedented sanctions on Moscow. The White House, I believe, said that the kind of sanctions is expected to wipe out the last 15 years of Russia's progress, Russia's economy. What's happening on ground where you are?
Well, firstly, I'd like to say whatever has happened again is a very unfortunate incident to the two brothers. And this was never expected. Russia, being a world power, definitely will protect its boundaries, will protect its image, its integrity. It is the balance that the rest of the world needs today. And these and many more reasons is one of the reasons, why we see what is happening currently on the Ukrainian soil. And of course, the rest of the world already understands that this is a Western game. It's a game of thrones, like I call it. It's a game of power. Unfortunately, innocent human lives are being paid for this very grievous games. Now, speaking about whatever the West says about Moscow, number one, humanity should be placed ahead of any other thing, ahead of ego, ahead of power, ahead of fame, of name, of money. But then I should say to you that the Russian Federation, under the leadership of President Putin, is being prepared also for whatsoever we see happening today. Since the year 2014, if history is being followed, we will discover that the Russian Federation also knew, or rather expected, whatsoever was happening today. And unlike we've had it before, the narratives has really changed in Moscow. The Russian people usually believed that the President Putin was just imposing himself on them. And until now, the rest of the Russian Federation understands that this is a necessity. This is something that had been planned. This is just a defense, something that had been planned for. The Western part had planned its own invasion, and this was Russia taking its first steps before it was invaded. Every other person, even the speaker before me, spoke about the expansion of NATO, and we all understand what NATO is meant for. In the year 2001, President Putin gave an interview and said, he spoke with the president of the United States in 2001 and said, why not you considering us joining NATO too? And of course, we all know the response, because NATO was basically created for the destabilization of the Soviet Union and continued its expansion even after the Soviet Union broke. Meaning that Russia, since it's been able to stay in world power, also should not keep standing. We all know the games that happened in power. You understand that these are simple power games that people who are in place will not allow other people to come close to them. It's just
Arabi, you haven't exactly answered the question, and this is what's happening on ground in terms of the sanctions and the economy, because you live there.
We have no challenges currently. There is no doubt that it may not. There is no doubt that we may not be seeing the effects of this on the long run, because such that the West did to Russia has never been done to any nation before. But believe me, the Russian Federation also is being prepared for this. It's been prepared. It's ready to go on the walls to keep its borders, to keep its integrity, to keep standing as a world power as it is, and it's not ready to bend. And that's why President Putin keeps coming out and is courageous to say, we will not bend. We will not bend. If you're bent on bringing us down, we are bent on standing. We're bent on keeping our Russianness.
All right. I appreciate your time. Dr. Joshua Arabi is Executive Member, NIDO Russia. Thank you. We'll talk to you again.
Thank you very much.
Ukraine's gas transit system operator said over the weekend that it had resumed operations at 2 distribution stations in the Kharkiv region and restarted gas supply to more than 3,000 consumers. Ukraine has scored a series of successes since Russia invaded, forcing Moscow's commanders to abandon an advance on the capital, Kyiv, before making rapid gains to drive them from Kharkiv. That's Ukraine's second biggest city. The operator said in a statement that both stations were shut down due to damage to the main gas pipeline in the Kharkiv region as a result of hostilities, adding that the damages have now been repaired. Some 54 gas distribution stations in 7 regions of Ukraine remain shut. The price of wheat on international markets has spiked after India banned the export of the cereal staple, the highest it has been in 2 months. Wheat prices have soared by around 60% on world markets this year, pushing up the cost of everything from bread to noodles. India is the world's second largest producer of wheat, but it has not previously been a major exporter, as most of its crop is sold on domestic markets. Government officials also said the ban was not permanent and could be revised. This comes as Ukraine's wheat exports plunged over the Russian invasion. And with droughts and floods threatening crops in other major producers, commodity traders were expecting supplies from India to make up for part of the shortfall.
In the name of prohibition, we are directing the wheat trade in a certain direction. We do not want wheat to go in an unregulated manner to places where it might just get either hoarded or where it may not be used to the purpose which we are hoping it would be used for, which is serving the food requirements of vulnerable nations and vulnerable people.
Well, to talk more about these disruptions, our business correspondent, Amy John McQuarrie, is with us here.
Hi, Millicent. Good to be here.
Good to see you. So where do we start from? India, export ban?
Yes, well, just as you read, it's not supposed to have this much effect, but, I mean, Russia and Ukraine are major wheat exporters to the country, to the world, but the activities at the Black Sea port and, of course, production activities have stalled, especially in Ukraine. So we have been feeling this since the war started, and it's only getting worse now. And as you read there, wheat prices have gone up about 60% since the beginning of the year. I wonder what we're going to do, because we're all feeling the pinch, even here in Nigeria. And to make it worse for us in Nigeria, the alternative would have been corn. But we had problems with corn even before now, so bad that the president had to, from the reserve, he had to give about 40,000 metric tons. But that doesn't seem to have gone down a long way. That's why the bread you used to buy for about 250 naira is about 700 naira or something like that. So it's everybody's problem. And well, maybe India is just doing what we call food protectionism, which is what a lot of countries have been doing. A lot of countries, even in Africa, they have stopped exporting some of their commodities.
That's to feed their population.
Exactly, because they want to feed, take care of the domestic demand. So that's part of what, even though I heard they have stuff with their weather, and that's part of the reason, and so, but at the end of the day, you want to take care of yourself before you take care of any other person, or before you make extra money for the economy.
Now, Russia says it's suspended electricity supply to Finland. I mean, according to this is definitely creating problems, electricity payments and all of that.
Yes.
But some people feel it might be a little bit more political, especially with Finland.
I mean, and interestingly, both operators from Russia's side and Finland have said, oh, it's just because they're having difficulties in payment. But interestingly, they've been having this relationship, this electricity trade relationship for about 20 years, and they've never had payment difficulties. And then suddenly Finland says it's going to join NATO, and then suddenly there's payment difficulties. Really interesting. But I mean, Finland is saying, well, that they may not be so affected by it, because Russia only supplies about 10% of their electricity, and they also have the alternative of wind power. And then they want to look up to Sweden. I mean, the fact that they want to look up to Sweden for extra electricity, it means they're still going to pay Sweden. So how are they going to pay them if they're having difficulties with Russia, So both parties are not saying it's connected to the war or to sentiment or to NATO and all that. But, I mean, at this time, and then suddenly they have payment difficulties after 20 years of trading, it raises a lot of questions, in the air.
We've talked about wheat, we've talked about electricity. We're going to come back and talk about oil, and this is when we return after the break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Of course, our business correspondent, John McQuarrie, is still with us talking about the effects of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So let's go to oil. Energy giant Shell says it's going to sell more than 400 of its petrol stations to Russia.
11, to be precise, of its petrol stations. It was interesting when you were talking to your guest. I was actually waiting to hear him tell us the impact of the sanctions on residents, of Russia, because outside Russia, we see the bigger picture. We hear, corporates have left, jobs are threatened. But last week, we also had the news that the ruble it was declared the best performing, because of a lot of initiative and strategies by the central bank. And they've been able to hold that up. But for how long they will hold that up? Because from a lot of economists' perspective, it's mostly artificial, because it's been held up by the government. Now, Shell now they're leaving. They've already left. Now they want to sell the petrol stations, the filling stations that they have, 411 of them, to save jobs, according to them. And good enough, it's a private corporate, in Russia that is buying it. The biggest private in Russia is the one buying it. So it's going to save some jobs, about 350 of it. They're going to accommodate. And, well, the corporate said it's part of their plans and everything. But, of course, we didn't see this coming, and they are doing, but at least they're making the most of it. But, I mean, it would be interesting to know from people who were there, because we also have the story that even the government had to create jobs, to accommodate some of those people who have been left unemployed, when those corporates left, you know, many jobs documentation in ministries and things like that, and you have to pay them, you know, and then you have the ban of threats, ban to oil and gas and all of that, which is a revenue of the government. So it will be interesting to know how Russia will sustain this high tempo that we see that they have started in the midst of the sanctions.
And reminded me of Russia's ambassador to the EU saying that, you know, the West should also think about, you know, the day after. You know, this is the day after this invasion and everything. And then with all of the sanctions and everything that appears to be going on. Thank you, Ini. Always a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
Businessman Vladislav Shipelman and the World Central Kitchen charity have set up a food packing factory in Ukraine's Dnipro to provide groceries and meals for internally displaced people. Using a production line format, volunteers pack vegetables and other products in bags, which are later loaded onto trucks and delivered to villages around Dnipro, where refugees are staying. The US-based World Central Kitchen is a non-governmental organization providing meals in response to humanitarian, climate and community crisis. English teacher displaced from Severodonetsk, 73 years old, Lasa, received bags with groceries in a village located 50 kilometers outside Dnipro. She said a previously beautiful town was destroyed and many people have left. And now, in coordination with the World Central Kitchen, they cooperate with 16 restaurants to prepare food and deliver it to shelters, hospitals and stations.
I am from Severodonetsk. It was a very beautiful town with good people. It was the town of science, chemistry, building, sports, and it was like a garden, my town. But so happens that now it is destroyed. It is a very great tragedy for my neighbors, for my relatives, for my pupils, I think, and many people left our native town.
We understood the situation, that we have no time to think or to rest. We just need to hard work now. And from this time, it was 25th of February, we start preparing meals. We began from, as I remember, 500 meals, and now we do 5,000 and more, 6,000, 7,000 meals a day.
And more on the impact of the invasion in the sporting world. World number 2 Daniil Medvedev has not given up hope of competing at Wimbledon next month, despite ban imposed on Russians and Belarusians by the organisers due to the invasion of Ukraine. The All England Lawn Tennis Club said it made the decision after discussions with the government, while the US Open champion remains hopeful that organisers might make a late U-turn on its decision. There have been suggestions that Wimbledon could be stripped off its ranking points by the two tours if the ban remains in force, effectively reducing the world's most famous tennis tournament to an exhibition event. Medvedev missed the beginning of the European clay court season as he skipped events in Monte Carlo, Madrid and Rome while he recovered his fitness. Russian boxer Dmitry Bivol is yet to be paid his share of the purse after his win over Saul Canelo Alvarez in Las Vegas May 8th due to Russia's ongoing war in Ukraine. Bivol went into the fight guaranteed £1.6 million with 30% of the pay-per-view sales. In an interview with TASS, the Russian news agency, Bivol explains how his money had still not arrived owing to the sanctions imposed on Russia. The fighter was forced to enter the ring without the Russian flag or have the national anthem of Russia be played. Bivol is believed to have not yet condemned the war.
Bivol, the undisputed super middleweight champion of the world, the pound-for-pound.
Who knows what happens to his money? Well, Ukraine has won the Men's Cerebral Palsy World Cup after beating Iran 1-0 in Spain. The Ukrainian Federation had to ask for donations before the tournament because their funding had been redirected to help the war effort following Russia's invasion. There were pre-tournament favourites and champions from 2017. Ivan Donenko scored the only goal in the final, while Brazil beat USA 2-0 in the third-place playoff. Cerebral palsy football is played with 7 players on each side and smaller goals. Players are split into categories based on their disabilities. Away from sports, the Eurovision Song Contest and NATO might not usually be associated, but the Military Alliance's deputy head congratulated Ukraine for winning the annual music contest with a beautiful song, calling it a testament to its bravery in fighting Russia. Foreign ministers from the 30-member alliance met in Berlin to discuss Finland and Sweden's possible membership of the alliance and its strategy in the face of what NATO Deputy Secretary General said was Russia's unjustified invasion of Ukraine. The Marathon Eurovision Song Contest saw the Kalush Orchestra pip the United Kingdom with their entry. Stefania and Guana sought to link its victory with Ukraine's fight against Russia and the alliance's solidarity with Kyiv. She said NATO wanted to send a message to Russian President Vladimir Putin that despite starting the most brutal and cynical conflict since the Second World War, Ukraine continued to surprise with its bravery and the West with its unity.
I would like to congratulate Ukraine for winning the Eurovision contest, and this is not something I'm making in a light way, because we have seen yesterday the immense public support all over Europe and Australia for the bravery of the. Of course, the song was beautiful. It is beautiful. So the message we want to send to Mr. Putin is that they've started the most brutal and cynical war since the Second World War. That probably he was and still is surprised by the bravery of the Ukrainian people and by the unity of the political West.
I will join my colleagues to continue to build consensus and around the strategic concept to ask for a strong response for the eastern flank and a strong response for Russia. Also, a component for the southern flank, because in these days in which our attention is completely focused correctly towards Russia and the eastern flank, we must not forget that from the south there are also Russian threats, and that the same threats concerning energy supplies, the political use of irregular migration, jihadism and terrorism remain strongly in places such as the Sahel or the Mediterranean region.
Well, staying with the contest, Kyiv residents say they are proud after Ukraine's Eurovision Song Contest win, and they are also hopeful of another victory in their battle against invading Russian forces. Ukraine's Kalush Orchestra won the contest in Italy Saturday night with their entry, Stefania. They rode a wave of public support that was welcomed by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Housewife Natalia Suvorova said it was important Ukraine be able to host the competition next year, despite the fighting. The bookmakers had made Kalush the clear favorite for the annual contest, which normally draws a television audience of close to 200 million. It's the third time that Ukraine has won the competition. Russia, which calls its action in Ukraine a special military operation, was excluded.
We were very happy with Ukraine's victory, and we hope that we will win not only at Eurovision. I was overwhelmed with emotions when Iceland came out with Ukrainian flags, and also when Kalush spoke for Azovstal.
Slava Ukraine, congratulations to them. And that's our coverage of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. We have more updates at 5, of course, the latest on our website. That's channelcv.com. I'm Melissa Walker. Thank you for watching.